Thank you so much for coming out today to hear Jennifer and her research. And I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Okay, you guys, thank you so much for being here because I know how valuable your time is. And I know that what I'm talking about today, Keisha and I were just talking about this, it's a little peripheral to what a lot of us do, but I'm obsessed with it. So, okay, I'm just gonna lay that out there. I'm obsessed with it. And my obsession with it comes from um, a long-standing interest in how people make their way to the labor market, and which I think is, intimately related to education and our education system and inequities in access to opportunity within our education system. And so I also have a background in educational technology, in terms of some curriculum that I used to develop for a for-profit company, and also in terms of some kind of professors that I worked with at who were in the ed tech space, and some randomized, large scale randomized trials that I worked on. Um, and so I'm interested in educational technology, and that was also my intersection into the question of artificial intelligence. And so, and my thesis advisor, my dissertation advisor, Richard Murnane, is a education, kind of retired, but laudable educational economist. And his work, about 20 and 30 years ago, was looking at impacts of automation on the skills that we needed to be teaching students in schools. And that was old school automation, an earlier round of automation that was really about, um, it was the wave of automation that made us no longer need travel agents on every corner because we can do it online. So that put a whole industry almost completely out of work. It was the one that led to, in addition to offshoring, it led to a lot of factory closings because a lot of factory jobs could now be automated on assembly lines. And so things that used to, and secretarial work, a lot of that was automated. So as things that could be routinized and things that could be programmed step by step that humans used to do could be taught to machines, because machines were good at doing things step by step. But with the new way, so that changed the economy, and it made it, it really kind of hollowed out the middle of the economy, and it made it so that we have elites and we have working class folks who mostly work in the service industry, and the industrial middle is pretty much, is much smaller than it used to be. So this is an old story. People know this story, but what's happening now with artificial intelligence is different, because artificial intelligence and machine learning, as you guys know, is creative. It makes new stuff, and it doesn't rely on step by step simple algorithms. It looks for large, and so I'm going to go ahead and share slides on this. It looks for large patterns in it uses a huge amount of computing power. It's currently not efficient at all. It's very expensive, the amount of power that it uses. But it looks for patterns in existing things, and due to massive increases in computing power in the past decade and a half, with graphics chips. I mean, you think about gaming, I only know this because my kids and my spouse play very fast, high high graphics video games, which I otherwise wouldn't know about. But those are extremely computationally intensive, and they require intensive graphic chips. And these graphics chips have made possible for computers to now process huge terabytes of information simultaneously and really quickly. And it enables them to look for patterns in text, in how people speak and write, and the words that go with other words. That's how you get large language models like ChatGPT, and patterns in images. And they can generate new images based on existing patterns, but without any underlying logic about what is in these things. There's no overarching theory. It's simply large scale, high speed pattern matching. And so So that's what's different, is that now it can make new stuff. And so it's coming for the jobs of people who have fancy jobs. That's what the writer's strike was about in Hollywood. It's what the actor's strike was about, because those jobs can be easily automated, and those are fancy. But let's face it, those are fancy jobs. So, okay, so it's coming for fancy jobs is the point. But my question is it who's really going to be hurt? Who is really going to be hurt, or who's at risk? And what can we as educators do to prepare students for this future of a new kind of automation? So the first thing, so I'm going to be talking about some projections that I've done and why I've done these projections. But first, I really want to have a conversation about the concept of what you'd be willing to automate if automation was good enough. And my theory is that I'm not using you as research subjects for this, but I am curious about what you think, because I'm curious of how people think about what they're willing to automate. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat, and that is a link to a survey. And your responses are anonymous. They will not be used in any kind of research study, but I want to see your thoughts on screen, which I'll share. And I want to have a little discussion about what you think. So if you would be willing to take that anonymous survey, it's just, I'll explain it to you, and I will actually screen share on it in case you can't look at it right now. And it is, you're seeing the survey screen, yeah? Okay. So it's assuming that a physical robot, or a chat bot like ChatGPT could do the following tasks in the future with the same technical accuracy as the average paid professional who does that thing. The same technical accuracy as the average paid professional person who does that thing. Which would you be willing to delegate to technology? And you can check them all, you can check none. And I see some people have already figured it out. So I'll give folks a few more minutes another minute or so to think about that. And then I'll show you the data, and I'm curious to have a conversation about what you think. About 12, 13, 14, 15 people. So if you just joined, there's a link in the chat. And right now I've got almost as many responses as there are people in the chat. And I'll give folks another minute or so. Okay, and I'm looking at the responses. So let's see. And this is anonymous, and this is not used for research purposes, except just to get a sense of like, how are people thinking about this? So interesting. I'm very interested in what you guys have written, and what you guys have clicked. So I'm going to share screen. And again, this is anonymous, so we don't know who clicked what. But so here's what people said. And folks said the thing everybody would be willing to delegate to a chatbot in the future to create a logo and layout for your website. Everybody would be 100% said yes. 92% said they'd be willing to let the chatbot or the tool schedule monthly meetings for your team. Most people, 83%, said they'd be willing to use it to create an engineering blueprint for a home renovation. The ones less than a little under half said drive you to a busy location in the city, meaning a self-driving car. And then nobody said they'd let it babysit a 1-year-old child. only a quarter of people said they let it decide between two surgical options or tutor a child in mathematics. And I think those are all of them. So here is my question. As you look at these data, please feel free to raise your hand. And I'm curious to know, as you look at this, what surprises you and what doesn't? Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what surprised me, including about myself, is that I did not pick, and most of us did not pick, deciding between two surgery options. Um, I feel like that was the one that gave me the most pause, or I was thinking about the most because it does seem like the kind of thing that we might use AI in a way that's complementary to like human expertise, that can draw on a much deeper wealth of knowledge than than an individual human could. And so like it could improve decision making, and yet somehow there was something about, it feels like all of these things, the ones that involve the most direct person to person interaction, maybe make us the most uncomfortable about delegating to AI.
So when you think of deciding between two surgery options, you think of person to person in the sense of a surgeon has his hands on a body, or person to person as in that's a conversation you have with your doctor?
I think that the latter.
Other thoughts about things that surprised you or didn't, or just think, or how you made your decisions in answering these, Jason?
I was surprised on how low the numbers were on tutor your child in mathematics, actually, because given that we're all educators, because I was one of the three who said that I would probably, have that happen, because I think when it comes to individual tutoring, I think there's probably the ability for AI to respond to the specific needs with the knowledge. I think it has, when it's one on one, and that's one of the few situations where I think one on one I think would actually be beneficial. My criteria there was that I thought the AI would be able to adapt and differentiate pretty quickly for an individual student, more than it would for sort of a larger class and all the different elements that come into play. Um, and so, and where I think the human sort of reactions in a whole larger class or a whole class or in small groups are, I think, need to be evaluated by, or should probably be evaluated by a human. But I think AI could, I think, be able to do it on a one-on-one basis. Anyway, that's where I was on. So I was surprised to see that number so low, I guess, on that tutor your child in mathematics.
Yeah, I thought long and hard on that one, right? Because the affective part of relationships and education, right? I mean, if a child is going to need tutoring in mathematics, it means that probably they're having challenges and difficulty with the subject, right? So setting them up in front of a computer to have that tutoring is not going to support them in the effective, you know, piece of education that I think, I hope our move towards AI and automation doesn't forget, right? Because that's really important, right? So yes, they can drill and kill all the math they want, but if the child isn't socio-emotionally, if their needs aren't being met, I don't know if that drill and kill is going to be beneficial. It may get them a couple more points on the standardized test, but it may not help them understand the importance, or maybe even be less, I'm not sure to go to a part to say the life math, but to at least be less resistant around mathematics, which already has this kind of cultural idea of being difficult and for only certain people. So I thought
Totally.
long and hard about it.
I mean, that's a really important. That's you echoed how I think about it, Carolyn. And Tori wrote in the chat that she was another one of the three. I thought AI playing a role in tutoring the mechanics of math and a human teacher could focus on contextualizing math in the real world. Tori, do you want to add to that or elaborate?
I think it's interesting now hearing Carolyn's point. I think I was thinking more of teaching than tutoring. I could see AI having a main role in teaching a student the basics of math and a human being able to, yeah, provide more context. But yeah, if there's individualized help that's needed for the student in tutoring, I can see the point. I think sort of for the driving you to a busy location, that was my biggest surprise that more people weren't willing to let a car drive them. And I'm wondering if in the future, when that technology is a little bit more advanced or we're more comfortable with it, if that number would go up. I was another person who I would be fine with that at this point.
Antonio wrote in the chat, I would use AI as a supplementary tutoring tool, but not as the main tutor. I think that human interaction is really important. Antonio, did you want to add or elaborate on that? Okay. And so Corbin has her hand up. Before Corbin says her question, I want to add to Tori's point about the self-driving car, because I was giving a talk about this topic of AI, not this work, but at Trinity University, Washington, and one of their alums, a youngish African-American woman, is the CEO of co-CEO of Waymo, which is the self-driving car company. And so she gave a keynote, and it really converted me to the idea that this can work, because she just talked about, but right now they're working in certain markets where the roads are very known, and they're not putting it on a road trip across the US because that's where self-driving cars have faltered. But in her talking about the systems and the accessibility advantages, it was very compelling. But maybe there's a generational piece to this. If Tori's one of the people saying yes, I don't know. Let's see. And then Rob says, to Tori's point, the counterfactual of self-driving cars is that humans are pretty bad at driving. It's one of the riskiest things we do on a regular basis. And there's a ton of room for improvement. That's exactly what she said. They just have such clear data that Waymo is making less mistakes than humans. And I drove one of my colleagues to his hotel after this event, and I did quite a few illegal things. And I said, Waymo would not have done that for you, just FYI. So I don't know. I think that's bad. I actually think that's bad. Okay, Corbin, sorry to keep you waiting.
I think we're good. We're going in a different direction. We're good.
Oh no, bring it.
Oh, well, no, it's just, I think it's really interesting. I was just resonating so much with what Carolyn shared about the affective dimension, and whether it's just interesting because when we look at teaching excellence, there's so much more beyond the cognitive content learning that takes shape in teaching, not even beyond tutoring. I think about, and Jennifer, you'll relate to this, but teaching statistics, how much I need to do throughout the semester, but especially in the first, I mean, if I do not deal with the affective and emotional dimension in the space in the first 2 weeks of that content, the lights just turn off for the whole semester. And until I could see that AI could do that effectively, and I at this point, I'm willing to believe, I'm willing to be open to the fact that that this could change and iterate over time. But at this particular moment, I can't imagine AI being able to have the kinds of empathetic, intuitive, affective responses that would be needed to make that happen. And actually, that's especially true for content where people have traditionally been marginalized in those spaces. So, if folks think they're not a math person, the affective dimension is especially that much more needed.
And Carolyn is weighing in with agreement about that in science as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
do so much unpacking of previous experiences with my elementary science folks, right? But the secondary folks who are the science geeks, majored in science, it's a very different audience, right? Because the elementary folks, they've had some really awful experiences in high school and college. So
I could not agree more. It's like 90% of the work is unpacking that and like emotional self-regulation. It's self-regulation, and expectation, understanding how this stuff, how you learn this stuff. Let's see. Antonio said, how was this work for children who need additional disability ADA accommodations for learning? And that's a great, I mean, to be honest, there are accessibility advantages of this because of the customized piece that Jason was referencing, that, if you have a conversation with ChatGPT, you can say, I still don't get it, explain it another way. And it may or may not be able to do it, but a lot of teachers also won't be able to do it. So there is a customized, a supplemental piece that you brought up, Antonio. And Ken just says, I think a lot about the way it's already entrenched bias will be hardwired into AI. Yes, Ken, do you want to say more about that?
Sorry, y'all got kids yelling in the background. Yeah, I think about the work of I think it's Ruha Benjamin and Sophia Noble, who are really having us think critically about the possibilities of everyday sort of constructions of race that are already with us, the creators of AI, going directly into the algorithms, where they're even more difficult and nuanced to pull out. And so when it comes to math tutoring, I think about some of the stuff I've seen with like is it sort of airport monitoring systems?
Yep.
They're incapable of acknowledging different types of hair or density of hair pattern,
Yep.
because the creators didn't program in that initially, and it's caused a problem for just who is and who is not considered a secure person. And so I think about all the different ways that this could impact us within the educational sphere in the same way. Again, I barely touched some of Ruha's work, but that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, Sophia Noble, I was thinking her book is Algorithms of Oppression, and there was a woman I can't remember if it was her, but there was a woman who talked about this at the conference at Trinity. And this is, I mean, the evidence is very clear that when you rely on algorithms to make human identifications, human distinctions, to make predictions that have high stakes, it builds in all of the human biases. So it just, because it replicates patterns that exist. So it is really urgent that the work in AI focus not only on the building in fail safes, which I think a lot of the models do build in fail safes, but beyond that, making sure that AI is never running the show. Because when you let AI run the show and you say, well, that's what the computer said, you're dead. You've lost. It's lost. Ruha Benjamin, yes, race after technology, Carolyn writes, echoing Kendis's point. So these are extremely important considerations. Okay, so what I'm focusing on, my piece is on jobs, what's going to happen to jobs, and whose jobs are going to be affected, and what's going to happen to the distribution of people's access to opportunity and access to ability to acquire expertise. If I can delegate junior level work to a bot, why would I hire and mentor a person? And so the incentives can be very misaligned, and not every company is going into this with the incentive to maximize human capacity. Often it's to maximize profit. So then we got to think, how do we prepare our students and our world? So, okay. I just went full screen, but I forgot to screen share. So let me screen share. Okay, so I'm building on works of techno optimists and techno worriers, both of which are really sets of economists, and I'm building on work of David Deming, also an economist, building on the work of my mentor Dick Murnane, showing that social skills and interpersonal skills are harder to routinize. And so what I'm trying to do is adapt the work of two sets of economists that have used ONET, which is the Occupational Information Network, data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, to understand how vulnerable are different jobs to different types of to automation. So I'm building on a guy named Felton, not Dr. Moss, but Felton, Raj, and Siemens, who use ability, importance, and level scores, which is similar to what I'm going to be doing. I'm using activity, importance, and level scores, but I'm using them in a more theoretical way than they are. I'm building on Frey and Osborne, who are looking at the ability to automate jobs based on known bottlenecks, which is social intelligence, complex perception and manipulation, which is like a self-driving car, or something more manipulable with hands, like fixing a sink, repairing a sink, a plumber working in a tricky space, replacing a toilet. Let's see, and then creative intelligence. But there are limitations to both these sets of work. And so I'm trying a third approach, or an approach that incorporates strengths of both of them. And I'm basically defining the bottlenecks similar to Frey and Osborne as theory of mind. These are the things I think where people have an advantage that's going to be extremely difficult to automate in our children's lifetimes and our children's lifetimes. Can you theorize what other people are thinking? And can you perform manual tasks that are very unpredictable and intricate? And can you create, especially with manual dexterity, and can you create intrinsic goals and objectives and make a plan for achieving them? And I mean intrinsic as in not just please schedule this meeting or please optimize our profits, what do we need to do, but like really thinking like what is needed in this world and what do I do to create it? Where's an opportunity? Where are places to have leverage in making things better? So like having a vision and a path, because AI has no intrinsic drive. It doesn't have a personality. So, okay. My data sources are ONET data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, an SOC. I have 873 SOCs, which are jobs. And those are supposedly all the jobs in the economy. And I've used these data for other projects. And then I've got 41 work activities, which is the universe of work activities defined by Bureau of Labor Statistics for these tasks. And for each activity, I've got how important is it to the task and what is the level of complexity of that activity? How important is it? What's the level of complexity? So I'm going to take those importance and I'm going to aggregate them to 100% for each job. The importance scores and the level scores, I'm going to use the complement of the level scores. And that's one of the things that other researchers haven't done. And I'm also going to map this onto two things: job zones, which is level of preparation, mostly level of education that you need for the job, and the type of things that are taught or the type of work that is done: realistic, investigative artistic, social, entrepreneurial, that should be enterprising, or conventional. And those are what the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses in all its career finder quizzes and like find your interest finder quizzes. It's this RIASEC model. It's very widely used in a lot of career interest inventories. Okay, so here are my 41 activities, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to tell you that I have grouped them into these RIASEC categories, and later I use Bureau of Labor Statistics grouping for jobs into these categories. But for the most part, I have just grouped these. And then I've decoded them as bottlenecks or not. And bottlenecks meaning they're hard to automate. So these are the 6 categories. And then I've coded jobs as 1 or 0. 1, if they utilize a theory of mind, that's one of the dimensions, a 1-0 dimension. Do they utilize a theory of mind? I call that TOMI. Then I have, do they utilize might they utilize flexible or benefit from flexible dexterity, being able to do complex physical tasks in close proximity or under uncertain conditions? And a lot of those are going to be the more realistic manual jobs. A little bit of the physical care, kind of like nurses assistants kind of work, and creative thinking, because if you've got a difficult building or repair task, you've got to be able to think, how do I work with this, crazy situation to make it work? You've got to be able to think creatively. Okay, and then and as things get italicized and bolded, it means they're falling into multiple categories. So then my third dimension is vision and strategy. Does the job require having a vision of where you want to go and making a systematic plan in a way that is not just in a way that entails having a true objective? Okay, so those are my 3. And what I'm going to end up doing is aggregating those. That's my first equation here. I'm going to aggregate those and divide by 3. And that's going to be my measure of how safe a job is. I'm going to aggregate those for each task and say, how safe is the task? It can range from 0, meaning it is not that safe, to 1, meaning it's very safe or it's pretty safe in terms of not being automatable. And so later I'm going to do sensitivity tests for this way of categorizing it, because this is really the most subjective part. But I haven't done the sensitivity test yet. This is all work in progress. So then I'm going to aggregate that up to the job level from tasks to jobs. And I'm going to create a job vulnerability measure. And that's a function of how relative important each task is to the job. And then I'm going to create how easy it is to automate the job, which is not just a measure of the task importance, but is also a measure of the level of the task. And here I'm assuming that the more sophisticated the task, the harder it is to automate, because we see this with ChatGPT, we see this with DALL-E, we see this with every automation tool out there. The more complex it is, the harder it is with driving a car, the harder it is to make it algorithmic. So I'm going to give an advantage to tasks that have higher complexity. Aggregating all of that importance times complexity to the job level gives me it's the ease of the percent of a job's tasks that are vulnerable to automation in roughly the next 2 decades. So that's going to be job automatability. Okay. What I estimate is that job automatability, the fraction of tasks in a job that can be automated, which sometimes is a good thing. Like I love automating. I live for automating. I like to automate meeting scheduling. I like to automate anything I can automate. And so it's not bad to automate, but it is if it disproportionately puts people out of work. And so that's what I'm concerned about. So, or encourages me not to hire people because I can just give it all to computers. So I'm estimating that about 32% of tasks on any given job are vulnerable to future automation, and that ranges from about 17% to 49%, according to these calculations. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. I will say that where the sectors that are most vulnerable with up to 40% automatable are at the top, middle are in the middle, and safest jobs, hardest to automate by my calculations, are at the bottom. And that includes, in my estimation, educational jobs because of the interpersonal part that we talked about, social intelligence, theory of mind, management, because they use a lot of vision, and physical life and social sciences because it involves a lot of also vision and creative thinking. And well, creative thinking in the sense of vision and strategy. So, okay, I'm not spending too much time on that because I want to get to the bigger picture stuff. So, I group jobs then. Now here I did not do these groupings myself. I used what the Bureau of Labor Statistics has already assigned as the categories where each of these almost 900 jobs fits the best. And so, of course, many jobs have aspects of all of this. Realistic is like, kind of manual labor. It's moving things around. It's getting things from place to place. It's fixing and building. And then conventional is what we think of as administrative tasks. Conventional would be making a spreadsheet, doing arithmetic. Well, actually, I can go back to my list. Conventional would be monitoring and controlling resources, scheduling, working with computers could go anyway. Recording and documenting information, evaluating information for compliance, monitoring processes and materials. Those are considered conventional. And then investigative is kind of like scientific, artistic is creating things, social is working with humans, enterprising is kind of being entrepreneurial, setting a vision, making a plan, engaging people to do that stuff, which has a social component. And so what we see here is the middle bar in these box and whisker plots. The middle bar in the box is the median. So by my algorithm, the areas where the highest percent of jobs are automatable are realistic occupations, except where they're very technical with high level dexterity or complexity. Conventional occupations, which we've seen in prior waves of routinization and automation, that as spreadsheets came along, a lot of mathematical tasks became routinized, things like that. And artistic. This is the one that's new from different prior waves of automation, because now you can create new stuff so cheaply and it will get better and better. You can write code. You can write, the writing code isn't great yet. You can write novels. You can draw, paint pictures and portraits. Not great. It's not great. In fact, some of it is completely nonsensical. It's nonsensical because there's no theory behind it, but it is astonishingly good for how quick it is. It can read a research article in seconds that it would take me 2 hours to read and parse, and it won't understand it the way that I understand it, but it can give me a pretty quick summary in a very short amount of time, much faster than a human, even an expert human. So, but it will also say nonsensical things that are completely wrong and make no sense because it doesn't have any theory behind it. So, okay, so this is just saying that the most vulnerable to automation are realistic, artistic, and conventional jobs, and the least vulnerable are investigative, social, and enterprising jobs. Okay, now what that means is, and then I map that onto the average salaries, the median annual salaries for all of these 873 jobs. And what we see is that the investigative and scientific jobs are the solid circles, And those tend to be the highest paying and middle paying jobs and the lowest risk of automation, because automation, percent of tasks vulnerable to automation, is the y-axis here. And so you see a negative slope between how much the job pays and how risky it is. And of course, most jobs are at the lower end of the salary scale, less than $100,000 a year. But the ones with highest automation risk on the y-axis are jobs like artistic, conventional, and realistic jobs. And so what that breaks down to is, here we want a flatter line. A flatter line means that the risk is more equitably distributed by how much people make. And so, because again, you've got salary on the x-axis. So if you want the risk to, you actually want a progressive risk where the wealthiest people are the most at risk. And that would be a positive sloping line. In my estimation, because I'm assuming that complexity is harder to automate, all of these are slightly negative sloping, but some are almost flat, like scientific. Scientific is somewhat protected at different levels of income. So same thing for social. It's a bit more protected even at lower levels of income, because social skills are so hard to automate. Same thing for enterprising. And then realistic and conventional, the highest risk is at the lowest salaries. Okay, so then I bring this to, what does this mean in terms of job zone? So job zone is how much training or preparation do you have? Little is basically less than a high school diploma. Some is high school diploma. It also takes into account experience, but mostly it's education. Medium is like an associate's degree. Considerable is a bachelor's degree, and extensive is an advanced degree or advanced levels of experience. So you can just see that this is basically the higher the share of job that is automatable on the x-axis, on the horizontal axis here, the higher the percent of job that's automatable, the less education the job requires, and it's almost linear. So, but still 25% of even very high level, people with advanced degrees, even 25% of that is automatable. I also want to say here, not all of this is job destruction. Some of this is that there will be new jobs that leverage the ability of AI to do cool things. So I'm going to show you a slide now that looks really scary, but only focuses on things that can be automated away. But when I automate my time, I'm able to do cooler, more innovative things, like making this graph. How cool is that? I'm just kidding. But when you so there are lots of gains if we can create new jobs and new opportunities and give people more fulfilling, meaningful work instead of doing nice tasks. But the question is, who is going to get those new jobs, those new innovative jobs? That's the question. So this one just focuses on what can be automated. And this is the number of positions in the US as of 2022 in thousands. So 12,000 positions right now in blue, with people with less than a high school education, is really 12.4 million. Is that right? Yes, because I add 3 zeros. Yeah, so it's 12.4 million. So you can see that the biggest jumps in percentages are lower levels of education. So the biggest drops. So I anticipate that and it's going to be like part of people's jobs are automated, not their whole job is automated. But if you automate, if you've got 10 people and you automate 30% of their work, now you might be able to get by with 7 people. And that's the risk. So I'm estimating that the number of jobs is going to drop by about 42% for less than a high school, about 38% for a high school diploma, about 34% for associate's degrees, about 28% for bachelor's degrees, and about 25% for advanced degrees. And so that it suggests that earnings inequities may get worse. And that's what concerns me, because I think some of the rhetoric is that it's going to get better because it's coming after rich people's jobs and white collar jobs, which is true, but it may not be enough to reverse existing trends toward inequity. And so that's my concern. So where I am with this is that I do worry, and I'm going to run some sensitivity tests on how I constructed the bottlenecks. And I actually want to do some crowdsourcing surveys on people's kind of the stuff I asked you guys, like willingness to automate, because that's where existing studies have not done that kind of crowdsourcing. They've crowdsourced how easily things can be automated, but not how willing people are to automate, because it keeps changing. How ease keeps changing. Rob, your hand is up.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to wait until you were done, but yeah, thank you. I love this. So obviously, I know we've talked about some of this before, and I have a lot of similar interests. And I'm wondering about three possible kind of alternative hypotheses, some of which you've touched on, and then maybe the question is like, if we think maybe the alternative hypotheses are preferable outcomes, that from a policy perspective, what can we do to try to lead to those rather than this outcome that seems fairly likely. And so what I'm going to put in the chat, you probably saw, Jennifer, and some of you may have also seen, but David Otter, a labor economist at MIT, who is a techno-pessimist and has been, unlike most economists, pretty critical of globalization and automation, and raised a lot of concerns about how it's essentially hollowed out the middle class. He is an optimist on AI. So I'm going to pose three possible alternative hypotheses, and he raises some of these in the article here. One is that I guess the point that you made about kind of complementarities, that it could, not necessarily automate away jobs, but make us more productive at these jobs. And then that leads to the second hypothesis, which is it maybe opens up more pathways into these higher paying, more creative jobs, like by eliminating barriers to them, kind of similar to how the rise of the early internet kind of like democratized content creation. It was like this kind of like executive decision making aided by AI becomes more accessible to more people. And then the third possibility I pose, which is maybe a little bit more pessimistic, but I'm wondering to what extent is what things are automated by AI itself an endogenous question. So like maybe like tech companies, like the design of AI will be determined in part by market forces. And if there's pressure to automate the job of a surgeon because a surgeon is paid $500,000, like there could be people who are a lot more willing to invest a lot more money in automating that job than automating someone who's paid $25,000 to do like a rote data entry job, something like that.
Although I hear surgeons have a good lobby.
Yeah. Yes.
But it is true. No, I think I think that's right. Like when I look at this slide, let me go back to screen share. I think I have understated the safety. I have overstated the risk of farming, fishing, forestry. Of course, a lot of that already has, we have factory farming. A lot of things have been automated to the ill of the environment, and building and grounds. But I think I've overestimated their risk to some extent for the reasons that you stated, that the comparative advantage of a machine, it would be so costly to get a machine that can do the intricacies when these are already jobs that are really not often paid as that well. So it may or may not be worth it for people to initially invest in that complexity. And so that's a really, I think, important point. And to your other point about complementarities and David Otter's work, I agree. And yet I talk to my friend that works in tech. I mean, this is anecdotal, but I talk to people about this a lot. And he says, the guys that aren't the best coders are being let go because they don't just want somebody that can brute force it anymore. They want somebody that can code it. And so then eventually, the machines are going to be able to outcode some of those guys. I don't know. That's me being anecdotal and pessimistic, which I hate being because I love technology. To no, I'm medium on technology. Let me go back to because I think your policy question goes back to my final slide. So I think I really think in higher ed, we have to think about helping students be effective social leaders, and in every field, not just in School of Education. And this goes back to the conversation about COGOD that we were having earlier this morning with Keisha and Felton and you, Rob, and Jason. And I think we have to think about social as in how do people work cooperatively together and learn to do that, and also how do we think about ways that foster a healthy society in terms of preparing our future, because we don't just delegate preparing our future to the schools. I mean, we do that poorly, we delegate that poorly, but we have to think of our industries as places of education that foster this healthy society of opportunity. And I think that is a huge shift for most parts of industry. And I do think that we also have to prepare our students to be able to leverage productivity tools so that they do become pathways to opportunity, as David Autor is writing about. And I'm going to leave it there. And now we still have 10 more minutes for questions and comments and discussion. Thank you guys for listening to me. Don't be shy to ask questions and say think that you hated it and that you think it's totally wrong. Or that you loved it. You can say that too.
I loved it, Jennifer. Thank you for the research and for presenting today. As you were talking through it and, issues of income disparity as well as worker displacement, definitely at the forefront. And I really appreciate you being very sensitive and attuned to that. One of the things I also wonder about when you throw in the dynamic that we are trying to get people to work longer, because we've not necessarily set up retirement as we should have for older workers, it just makes me wonder, you have these two really forceful dynamics happening at a time when young people, our students, are sort of going out into the workplace. And so what becomes the concentrated impact of the nexus of these two dynamics that are quite forceful? And I don't think that we have seen another time in our history. I mean, when Reagan came into office, we saw a huge rollback on that whole retirement piece that forced a lot of older workers to have to work longer. So it's a working retirement. And so I'm just curious, have you given any thought to, what is the impact of these two dynamics? And then what do you do about it from an educator perspective in terms of where we sit, but also a policy perspective?
It sounds, I mean, I have this conversation a lot with my Spanish tutor in Spain, because I think she feels, looking at the US, that it's just even worse, that people in senior positions will not let go of those positions to save for anything. They are clinging for dear life, and that there's less entrepreneurial opportunity. And so she feels stuck. And I think a lot of people I talk to feel stuck. But I think it's such an opportunity to change the narrative, because older workers are perfectly poised to mentor and build expertise, because the only stake they have in the game is, the legacy they leave behind. So it's not so much like I need this job to, be able to, pay my mortgage, or maybe it still is, but it's more about like, what is my legacy? And the legacy needs to be building pathways that are not just things like, oh, we give the work to, a computer because it's cheaper. I think it's a great question. I think it's a it's a depressing question.
And just so you had a human Spanish tutor and not a chatbot while you were in Spain.
Oh my gosh, I'm telling you, I love AI for translate. The growth in AI translation capabilities is astonishing. The fact that AI can make a very good transcript of this talk, which would not have been possible 10 years ago, is astonishing to me. And if I could, I love my tutor. I would probably talk to a chatbot all day because it's cheaper. But no. I believe we have to. I just think there's no replacement for human interaction for learning.
So I was back to the sort of the tutor and the because I was listening to NPR report yesterday, and it was all about the learning loss from COVID, and it was a report focused on Portland. I don't know if any of you heard it, but it started off with a story about how it was the families who could afford it who could get the tutors, right? But the ones who could not have access, equitable, were those who could not afford the tutors, and so it's the complementary opportunity, I think, of the tutoring from an equitable point of view. If you can lower the cost, I agree that a human tutor is better than though AI is getting much better because I think on a one-on-one basis, I think it can respond to sort of nuances eventually. I think it will get there, but if it's a AI tutor even now is better than no tutor at all. And if the cost can be low, I think it will add to some equity in the sort of the learning loss, which is going on, for example. And because a human tutor is extremely expensive about one-on-one, right? It just is, and only certain people can have access and afford it.
I think that's right. When the woman was the CEO of Waymo was presenting, I was thinking about, she was talking about the visually impaired and low income visually impaired, and a visually impaired person has difficult, especially an older person has difficulty using a phone to order a car. But if that is built into the technology as an accessibility tool or a something that makes it easier for people who are excluded to get access and find a way in, that's a win. And I see Samantha writing about this as well, that if thinking about how AI can support us to do the things it technically does well to give us time for the human interpersonal pieces, I think that's so huge because we don't need to spend our time on doodle polls. We have to, but it's horrible. It's a horrible waste of human capacity.
Yeah. I'm going to respectfully push back on the AI tutoring for some because it's cheaper. Because I see that as a potential equity pitfall in this analogous argument where resources are the disproportionate use of resources and a point of equity. And the idea that, oh, we're providing tutoring to groups of students who need it, but it's not high quality tutoring because it's not as good as a real person. I'm not making the point very eloquently, but I see it as a real point of equity. And I don't want us to fall into the trap of there are students who are, everyone's getting tutoring, some are getting AI, some are getting real people, the real people being superior, and who gets the AI tutoring. So I really fret and worry about that in our educational space. And I know Tracy and I have to drop off because we have a session with the National Center of Teacher Quality, which has created some real equity pitfalls in teacher education. So I want to be on time and present for that session. But thank you, Jennifer. Really, really thoughtful. Made me do a lot of thinking. And I think you're spot on about the differences in coding. Adam is a comp sci major. And he talks about that a lot, that there are students, and I kind of go like this, la 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 la, because it's a academic integrity issue. There are kids who hand in their coded assignments here at AU by running it through Chat GPT and have them do the coding, have it do the coding. And he does use Chat GPT as a tool, but then he goes back through the codes and make sure it's correct and make sure it's at a high level. So he is learning to use it as a tool. I'm not sure that's true with all kids, and it becomes an academic integrity issue, but that's a whole nother ball of wax.
And that we can teach. We can teach that. I mean, we can't enforce ethics, but we can encourage ethics.
Yeah.
Thank you guys
anyway,
for coming.
Thank you.
I'm grateful. I'm so grateful we're at time. And Keisha has put in the chat about an event on this topic today at Kogan. I'm just so grateful you guys made the time to have this conversation today. Thank you. Let me turn it back to Dr. Hayes.
Thank you, Jennifer. I just want to say thank you for your research again, and thank you for presenting to us. Very rich conversation. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending and engaging.
Have a wonderful day, rest of your day. Thank you guys.